Okay, so let's move on to organic carbon. We have dissolved organic carbon, which is less than 0.45 micrometers in size. We have particulate organic carbon and total organic carbon, which can be estimated by biological oxygen demand, which is basically a method of giving organisms the ability to take up all of the oxygen in in a bottle of water through respiration and see how much oxygen they can remove. We have fine particulate organic carbon, and so that's anything in the kind of 0.45 to 1 millimeter size range, and then coarse particulate organic carbon, which is greater than 1 millimeter in size. So organic matter inputs are especially important in headwater streams where it's possible they could be really shady and cold, and algal growth might be limited. And so in this case, the streams might be getting a lot more of their carbon from organic matter inputs like detritus and leaf litter from terrestrial streams or terrestrial sources. And this organic carbon, when it comes into the system or when it's produced in the system, so coming in meaning allochthonous, produced in the system, meaning autochthonous. This organic carbon can either be recalcitrant, can be really hard to break down, or it can be labile, really easy to break down. Here's a picture from the beach just a few days ago showing some really nice dissolved organic carbon in some kind of wetlandy areas near the beach. You can see this really dark staining in my dog Bodie. He likes to go on long walks on the beach. Okay, dissolved organic matter or dissolved organic carbon. So this is the largest carbon pool in running waters. Again, smaller than a 0.45 micrometer filter. And it's the result of the breakdown of larger molecules, things like lignins, tannins, cellulose. When those things break down, they create what are called humic compounds, and humic compounds give that water kind of a brownish color. It's like being stained with tea or something like that. And so things like humic acids, fulvic acids, and humin. But then there are also a variety of non-humic compounds, things like sugars, carbohydrates, fatty and amino acids. Those things tend to be more labile, easier to break down than the humic substances. Dissolved organic matter and these humic compounds can absorb onto clays and oxides. And these are really important sources of carbon for bacteria, which are often carbon limited. So dissolved organic carbon is a really important measure in systems dominated by bacteria. So these tannins and humic substances, I'll talk about them in a few different ways. They're really interesting because they can attach to other organic substances like pollutants. They can form complexes with metal ions like iron or other heavy metals. And they can form colloids and large organic flocks that are also resistant to decay. They can color the water brown like we saw, absorbing light, making it harder for photosynthetic organisms to access light. And they create things like black water streams and black water swamps. They can also absorb UV radiation, which can be really good to protect organisms from UV radiation. But these things are resistant to biological degradation. And so once you have a system that's dominated by tannins, it's hard to kind of get rid of it. And they can, these compounds can make problems for water purification. So if your drinking water source is contaminated by these things, it can be really hard to get rid of it. Okay, moving on to fine particulate organic matter. This is basically created anytime things are broken down. So organisms that eat fine particulate organic matter, can be things like bacteria, but actually I think what this has meant is that the bacteria are colonizing fine particulate organic matter and so are kind of part of it. It is much less well understood than things like coarse particulate organic matter. But basically, we have anytime things are being eaten, there's little particles that get lost. Feces are produced, those become fine particulate organic matter. Sometimes there's flocculation, which is like things kind of joining together. Some of the colloids we were talking about for dissolved organic matter could turn into fine particulate organic matter. And so this is basically all the stuff that collector filters are going to be eating. So it's made up of particles, feces, dead cells, conidia, which are fungal spores. And some organisms make particles larger through flocculation and aggregation. So if you're a collector filter, you eat these little tiny particles, and then your feces they're also fine particulate organic matter, but they might be larger than what you were eating. And that would be this kind of aggregation. Okay, carbon in wetlands. Carbon comes in as an organic material and then can be decomposed into CO2, but only when there's oxygen available, right? It can be decomposed into methane when there's no oxygen available. And then this methane can then diffuse upward. And it's a very potent greenhouse gas. It's about 20 times more powerful than CO2. So it is a really big problem, but it's also a natural source. Methanotrophs are organisms that can basically eat methane, but there are methanogens that can produce it. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. So when carbon comes into a system that's anoxic, oftentimes because methanogenesis is less efficient than aerobic respiration, organic matter can build up at the bottom of these lakes and bogs and wetlands. And then it builds up in the form of peat, especially in acidic and anoxic environments. And these environments can occur anywhere wetlands occur. So here's a map of wetlands. And basically they're considered hypoxic if they're deficient in oxygen and anoxic if there's no oxygen. But these wetland regions are really important for all kinds of nutrient transformations, and also in places where there are reduced soils, so really low redox potentials. They also have more organic material. And I've talked a little bit about iron staining, iron oxidizing bacteria. And these wetlands tend to have much slower decomposition than what takes place on land surfaces or in flowing waters. And so because of the slow decomposition, anything that lands in these wetlands may be preserved along with the peat. And so this is a really fascinating story from National Geographic a few years back, showing a person that was found in a Danish bog. And they think they aged this person to 2,300 years old. And what's amazing is the preservation of skin and hair. And sometimes you can even tell the colors of eyes. So it's really fascinating for archaeology, but also for paleolimnology and forensics and all kinds of really interesting disciplines in these peat bogs. And I mentioned that other important ecosystem services occur in wetlands. So we try to kind of create these environments where things like denitrification in particular can happen. And that is the taking of nitrogen from bioavailable forms like nitrate and ammonium and turning them back into nitrogen gas and releasing them to the atmosphere where they can really do no damage. And so if we can create these environments where we slow down water, we provide a lot of carbon, we can create the environment where denitrification might occur, and that can be good for nutrient pollution overall. And then this is kind of a more, well, I don't know if it's all that recent, but basically there's this other source of carbon. It's called black carbon or biochar. It's a very important and very recalcitrant form, and it results from the burning of terrestrial vegetation, things like wildfires. Basically it's charcoal, but tiny little bits of charcoal. It's a really important component of dissolved organic carbon, and particulate organic carbon in marine systems. And it can impede the growth of invertebrates and absorb things like metals and contaminants, which are both positive and negative effects. And you can kind of see the evidence of biochar in ice formations, these layers of black, or just like on the surface of ice. And it's basically found in air pollution that then gets trapped in ice. Okay, we're going to stop and talk more about decomposition next.